Good evening. My name is Dr. Daniel Meola, and my meditation tonight is the gospel of purity of heart, moving from shame to love. Just as a preface too, I'm taking this time to prepare you for Eucharistic adoration, so this will be a meditation on purity of heart. If you want more of the practical tips and nuts and bolts about how to put this into practice, we'll answer that upstairs on the questions and answers. But I really want to meditate about what is the essence of purity of heart here to prepare your hearts for an encounter with the pure heart of Jesus Christ. So I took the gospel of purity of heart from St. John Paul II's Theology of the Body. That's his phrase. John Paul II likes to say the gospel of this and that to draw attention to it. So famously, the gospel of life. He also says the gospel of suffering, gospel of work. So he's trying to highlight something very important here when he says the gospel of purity of heart. It comes from Theology of the Body, for those who are not familiar with that. It's a collection of 129 public speeches he gave during the first 5 years of his pontificate on what it means to be a human person, love, marriage, and family. I'm excited to be sharing about this tonight because this is something that has deeply shaped my life. It's helped me with my own healing journey with purity, but it guides my marriage today and my dating relationships. So this is something I've lived and practiced and breathed. So I'm excited to share this with you because it forms a joyful reality in my life. Today we're going to reflect on what John Paul II calls the original experiences of love and how that relates to the gospel of purity of heart. We're going to focus on 3 questions. And I think these 3 questions you could take to your prayer in your time before Lord in the Eucharistic adoration. And these questions are to be pondered with the Lord. What is love? What is purity of heart? And why is purity of heart essential to love? So what is love? No small question, right? When we think about love and purity in your life, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? I'm going to pause. I hope it was something positive. Maybe an image of Mary, Joseph, Christ. However, I know for many of us, it could be some kind of thought or situation connected to a feeling of guilt and shame. And I've been there. And if that's where you are starting this talk, I just want to say it's okay. You're not alone. In fact, our greatest grandparents, Adam and Eve, experienced shame in regard to purity as well. John Paul II reminds us. They were so ashamed that they sewed fig leaves and hid behind bushes, as if God wouldn't see them on the 3rd bush on the right. And unfortunately, this hiding compounded their shame, because shame grows the more it's hidden. It thrives in secrecy and darkness. I like to use the analogy of Sauron. He kept his evil plans from the Fellowship of the Ring and Lord of the Rings. Why? So it could grow. So this hiddenness too can increase our shame, and unfortunately, the festering of shame can weaken our self-esteem. It's easy to move from feeling shame to destructive self-talk. I'll never be pure. I can't stick to any plan for purity. I'm not worth being loved for all the mistakes I made. Or just simply, I'm not worthy of love. I also know through my ministry working with relationally broken people that this can also lead to unhealthy self-protecting of the heart. And what I mean by that is protecting the heart from being fully given in relationships because of a past wound in a relationship, or maybe family of origin. And these patterns of self-protecting can also give us more shame because we know we should be giving more. So all of a sudden, we have not just played in the mud, but we're stuck deep in the mud of shame. How do we get out of this shame? First, one way to start is to recognize not everything about shame is bad. John Paul II teaches that shame is a boundary experience between two realities. On one hand, it makes us aware of being used, could indicate a fault, a sin, a wound, some kind of suffering, which of course we want to get rid of. On the other hand, it points towards what we most deeply desire, the opposite of being used, of being loved for our sake, for ourselves. The reality of love that we're called to give and receive totally. It points to the pure love that we desire. Second, John Paul II endlessly taught in Theology of the Body. Now, what modern man really needs to discover is the original experiences of man, which are not sin, shame, and suffering, but of being loved by God and loving God in return. We need to get in touch with this because it's so easy to fall into just thinking incessantly about our shame and negative thoughts about ourselves. We need to break out of this and be loved by God. So to do this work to be loved by God, John Paul II reflects on what is the true love we seek. And he goes back to Genesis, following Christ's lead. Christ in Matthew 19 was questioned by the Pharisees about the possibility of love. They were trying to trap him, asking him what was his belief on divorce. There's two camps at the time. Divorce was permissible for any reason, or divorce is permissible for just adultery and abuse. And Christ, rather than being trapped in that question, points them back to the beginning. It says, out of the hardness of your heart, Moses allowed divorce, but in the beginning it was not so. He points us back to the Genesis accounts of love. And in Genesis, we read that God instituted marriage between a man and a woman at creation, and he deemed it very good. To all of our cynicism that may arise for relationships, God says, no, it is good. Marriage and love is always possible. And there in Genesis, John Paul II says, we discover three original experiences of love at the heart of Adam and Eve's married love that make it very good. These original experiences are foundational for all human love, whether married or not, but here we'll focus on the relationship to marriage and purity. These three original experiences are original solitude, original unity, and original nakedness. A nice acronym to remember this is love brings the sun. Solitude, unity, nakedness, and points to the Son, Jesus Christ, who fulfills these preeminently. So what is this? What does he mean by these terms? Love is solitude. The first experience of Adam and Eve is solitude. Adam is alone before the animals, searching for a suitable partner in Genesis. John Paul II says that this experience is not a lack, first of all, but it's God wanting Adam to realize that his identity must be first rooted in God. The human being is of such amazing stature that he or she is from God and finds fulfillment only in God. We are God's beloved. We are a unique and unrepeatable gift given by God to the world. And what's great is, at the time of our creation, God saw all the mistakes that we would make and still said, it's good that you exist. You're always a gift, no matter the mistakes you've made. So to say love is solitude is to say that God must be the source of our identity and our love. Another way of putting this is that the capacity to love and have intimacy with another is measured by my capacity to have solitude with God. My capacity to love and have intimacy with another is measured by my capacity to have solitude before God. We're not satisfied with just human love, but rather a love that gives God too. The best gift you have to give another or a future spouse is God in you. So the gospel of purity begins with a deep, prayerful love of God. And why Christ links purity to seeing God in the Beatitudes in Matthew 5:8. He says, "Blessed are the pure of heart, for they will see God. Purity of heart is this seeing God in all things, but it's first and foremost a gift from God before any work. This is why purity goes far beyond just chastity. Chastity is important. It's a virtue we'll talk about. But purity of heart is this deeper of seeing God in all things and receiving that vision as a gift from God, first and foremost. The second experience that John Paul II talks about that's necessary for love is unity. This original unity is beautifully described as help in Genesis. Adam, we read in 2:20, none of them, referring to the animals, proved to be a suitable help for man until he meets Eve. A help for what? First of all, Eve is a help for his identity. Adam was alone and he ached for something. He ached to give himself to another who was like him so he could identify with her, but also someone different, someone that completed what he was lacking. Adam recognizes in Eve a help, a communion that deepens their original solitude with God and fulfills the love that they have yearned to give to one another. This is all expressed in Adam's beautiful ode to love when he sees Eve and he exclaims, "This one at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. This one shall be called woman, for out of her man this one has been taken." John Paul II says very beautifully too that the Song of Songs is a poetry expanding this one line by Adam. There's a profound reverence for woman, a joyful recognition of a unity within difference that completes each Adam and Eve. They rejoice that love is complementary. In this context, John Paul II says that Adam and Eve recognize the theology of the body, which he said could also be called a theology of sexual difference. Why? Because John Paul II calls the spousal meaning of the body, another phrase of his, sets man's sexual difference apart from all of the animals. The body has a spousal meaning, referring to a call to original unity with the opposite sex, to fulfill man's identity as an existence in relation to God and to others. This is a revelation God has written into sexual difference and observable by Adam upon seeing the woman's body. From this call to communion, Adam then does what? The man left his father and mother and clings to his wife. The word cling here in Hebrew means glued. It represents a bond that cannot be broken. Love as unity here means indissolubility, forever. Love is ordered to this unity of also being exclusive and faithful. God didn't give Adam multiple Eves, but one Eve. And his heart was to have no rivals to Eve. These principles of unity in Adam and Eve's love are beautifully summed up, I think, in the Catholic wedding vows. I, Adam, take you, Eve, for my wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part. This vow is necessary for unity because true love yearns to give not just the present moment, but every moment in this moment. The gospel of purity serves this beautiful reality of unity that is signified by these Catholic wedding vows. Purity, as St. John Paul II understands it, is protecting and nurturing my desire for true and lasting love. Purity is protecting and nurturing my desire for true and lasting love. It recognizes that love is made for total self-giving of wedding vows. And the nobility and the highest beauty of individual sexual acts is to be an expression of these wedding vows. The third original experience of love that John Paul II points out that's important for the gospel of purity is what he calls original nakedness. This is where in Genesis it says, quote, "The man and his wife were both naked, yet felt no shame." John Paul II says, quote, "This captures the essence of purity. St. John Paul II teaches the original nakedness experienced by Adam and Eve here as chaste and pure, as being denoted as it was without shame. This doesn't mean a shamelessness, which means the lack of the proper moral guilt. It's not advocating nudism. Modesty, in fact, can safeguard what is being indicated here. Their love without shame indicates something deeper, indicates a purity of heart. But what does this consist? John Paul II says that first and foremost, it's the ability to read the language of the human body. It's seeing the human person in his or her full dignity, seeing the human person in his or her full dignity as a gift from God, called to a communion marked by the self-gift of love. So modesty, insofar as it protects and builds up this dignity, expresses the truth that's being indicated here about nakedness without shame. This truth about nakedness without shame or purity as protecting the dignity of the person is why St. John Paul II famously taught that the problem with pornography is not that it shows too much, but it shows too little of the person. Similarly, sex before marriage and hookups are wrong, not because it is too much too soon, but too little too soon of the dignity of the person. And we could go on. Likewise, the acts of impurity with oneself entails a self-withdrawal from relationships and uses the body as a sexual outlet, which again entails a thinking too little of a person's own body, of communion. So John Paul II is saying the chief problem at the root of all sexual sins today is not that people think too much of the body, but they think too little of it. This is why John Paul II says to counter impurity, we don't need a moral prudery based upon a suspicion of the body, but rather we need to grow in reverence. Reverence for the amazing dignity and beauty of every human body. This is why he reminds people that there's a theology of the body. To use a modern phrase, this is utterly positive, body positive, through and through. And so our question tonight is, do we have sufficient reverence for our bodies? Purity is a gift of seeing the full person. Now, John Paul II also says that it is a virtue as well that orders sexual emotion towards the truth of authentic communion. This virtue is known as chastity. Contrary to the stereotypes, chastity is not a flight from sexual activities, but rather a self-mastery in sexual relations. And this self-mastery is necessary for love. After all, if sexual relations are called to be physical expressions of the total self-gift of marriage, which as a self-gift requires chastity or self-mastery, you cannot give what you first do not possess. So the important point is that chastity makes possible self-mastery for total self-gift. All the no's are at service of this great yes of love as a total self-gift. And because of this connection between self-mastery and self-gift, chastity, purity, it's inseparable from love. But again, chastity is not primarily about do's and don'ts, it's about lasting love. That's why it's an ill-advised attempt at chastity to ask, how far is too far? The real question for true lovers is, how pure can I be? How reverent can I be to the mystery of the body? Think about these questions tonight before the Lord in Eucharistic adoration, where tonight we practice reverence before the body of Christ. I'm convinced that John Paul II's deep reverence from the body was born of his reverence before the body of Christ in Eucharistic adoration. He would spend hours in front of Eucharistic adoration. His reverence for the body grew from the reverence of Christ's body. So pray tonight, Lord, show me how I can be purer and purer. Help me to see you in all things And yes, when it entails sacrifice, to not flinch from it, but rather understand that holiness passes through the cross, not around it. And when you are given into temptations to discourage, negative self-talk about yourself, like we started with, I'm worthless, I'm a failure, no one will ever love me, I can never be pure. Say, no, these thoughts are not from the Lord. These thoughts of self-condemnation are not from the Lord. He lifts me up and says, I am his beloved, capable of great love, capable of pure love. Recommit yourself to this beautiful plan that the Lord has for you, that I've outlined a little bit tonight. And remember these famous words from John Paul. When you are about to give in to cynicism or doubt, remember these. We are not the sum of our weaknesses and failures. We are the sum of the Father's love for us and our real capacity to become the image of his Son. Dwelling in this love, slowly, shame will melt away and will cultivate a pure heart. Amen.